After the incident, a detective asked Ryan Thompson to come to Northwestern Memorial Hospital to give a formal statement. He sat in a plastic chair outside the room, waiting. Then the door opened and a nurse waved him in. The woman in the hospital bed opened her eyes and pointed straight at him. "You kissed me." Not a question, a statement. The room was packed with lawyers and assistants, and every single one of them went rigid. He was just a black driver, a quiet single father leaning in the doorway saying nothing. When he calmly confirmed it, someone whispered the word lawsuit, but he said only one sentence and the entire room went silent. "Because you had stopped breathing." So what exactly happened inside his car earlier, and why did it shake all of Chicago to its core? Before I get into the full story, I want to ask you something. If you were in that hospital room right now, standing where those lawyers were standing, and you heard a man say those 4 words because you had stopped breathing, what would you feel? Would you believe him immediately, or would the circumstances make you hesitate? Because here's the truth. Most of the people in that room hesitated, and the ones who hesitated the longest were the ones who should have known better. Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And now let me take you back earlier to a man driving alone through Chicago with nobody watching, and a decision he made in the dark that he never expected anyone to question. Every day without fail, Ryan Thompson found a drawing on the kitchen table. He never asked Zoe to leave them. She never explained why she did. It was just something that happened between them, the way certain things happen in houses where 2 people love each other and have run out of words for it. He would come home after a long night behind the wheel, hang his keys on the hook by the door, and there it would be. A sheet of paper with crayon marks still soft at the edges left there by a 7-year-old who had already fallen back asleep. He always stood over it for a moment before making coffee. Some days it was their apartment building with the crooked fire escape she loved to stare at from her bedroom window. Some days it was their cat, Mr. Boots, stretched across the radiator. And some days, more often than Ryan could explain, it was a drawing of 3 people standing in front of a house surrounded by flowers. Always 3, always the same. He never asked who the 3rd person was supposed to be, and Zoe never told him. He kept every single one of them in a shoebox under his bed. Ryan was in his late 30s and had been driving nights for a couple of years. Before that, he had spent a decade as a firefighter with Station 12 in Bridgeport, long enough to know what a body in distress looked like, long enough to stop flinching at things that made other people freeze. He had not left the job because he was tired of it. He left because his wife Jessica died in a car accident one afternoon in November. And the next morning, Zoe woke up and called for her mother and only found him. After that, the math was simple. He needed to be home when she woke up, and he needed to be home when she went to sleep. Driving nights made that possible, so that is what he did. It was not a glamorous life. It was not the life he had planned, but it was the one he had, and he had stopped spending energy mourning the distance between the two. When everything changed, it started the same way every other shift did. He picked up a few rides, dropped off a couple near Wrigley Field, waited outside a bar in Wicker Park, then got the notification for his next passenger. The pickup location was the Lakeside Pavilion, one of those historic event venues near the waterfront that charged more per evening than Ryan made in a month. He pulled up to the front where a small crowd of well-dressed people were still filtering out under the lights and waited. She came out alone. Claire Bennett moved through a room the way people do when they are used to everyone in it adjusting to them. She was wearing a black dress carrying a small clutch and a coffee cup from the event caterer. The kind of setup where someone arranges a private espresso station near the exit, so guests do not have to suffer the indignity of leaving a charity gala without caffeine. She got into the back seat without looking at him, directly gave him an address on the Gold Coast, and turned toward the window. Ryan pulled out into traffic. For the first several minutes, the ride was quiet. He was used to quiet. She was not on her phone, just sitting there drinking her coffee, watching the city pass. Then she made a small sound. Ryan glanced in the rearview mirror. She had one hand pressed flat against her sternum, fingers spread. Her brow was furrowed in a way that looked less like thought and more like effort. "You okay back there?" he asked. She didn't answer right away, then very quietly, "I'm not sure." He looked again. Her lips, even in the passing streetlight, looked wrong, not pale, not chapped, but slightly off in color in a way that hit something old and trained in the back of his brain. He pulled toward the right lane. "Does anything feel like it's swelling your throat?" She turned to look at him for the first time since she had gotten in the car. Her eyes were wide in a way that had nothing to do with surprise. "Yes," she said. And then, do you carry an EpiPen?" I don't have allergies, ma'am. Do you have an EpiPen in your bag?" "No." Her voice was already thinner. "No, I don't." He had the car stopped at the curb before she finished the sentence. Hazard lights on, phone out. He called 911 while he got out of the driver's seat and opened her door. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, and he gave the cross streets fast and clear the way he had been trained. No hesitation, no filler words, just location, nature of emergency, patient status. They told him the nearest unit was several minutes out. He knew before they finished the sentence that it was too long. Anaphylaxis does not negotiate. It does not give you time to wait for the right moment or the right person. Her airway was swelling, her body reacting to something in that coffee with a violence that had nothing to do with how serious or successful or composed she was in the rest of her life. Biology does not care who you are, it only cares about time. She was already struggling to stay upright in the seat when he crouched in front of her. He kept his voice even, not soft, not urgent, just level, the same register he had learned to use in burning buildings, when someone needed to hear that the person talking to them knew exactly what they were doing. "I need you to stay with me," he said. "I know this is frightening. I need you to look at me and keep breathing as long as you can." She looked at him. Her hand found his forearm and held it. He did not know her name. He did not know she ran one of the largest real estate development firms in the Midwest, or that the charity gala she had just left was one she had organized herself to fund early childhood literacy programs across the city. He did not know any of that. He only knew what was directly in front of him, a woman whose body was failing her, and minutes he did not have. She lost consciousness faster than he expected. He checked her airway, tilted her head back, and began CPR, chest compressions, first measured and deliberate, the count coming automatically because it had been drilled into him so many times it lived in his hands before it reached his mind. He breathed for her twice, checked, continued. The hazard lights kept blinking. Headlights from passing cars swept across them and moved on. One car did not move on. A rideshare driver heading the opposite direction slowed to look, pulled his phone up through the window, and kept it there for a while before driving away. He would post the video later with the caption driver performing CPR on passenger in Chicago. "Hope she's okay." By the next day, the number had climbed past hundreds of thousands, and someone with a clearer angle on the footage had already identified the woman as Claire Bennett, CEO of Bennett Group. Ryan knew none of this. He knew the temperature of the pavement under his knees. He knew the precise weight of her rib cage pushing back against his hands with each compression. He knew the particular quality of silence that falls over a city block at that hour. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of everything holding its breath. He had been in this place before, in burning buildings, in collapsed stairwells, in the back of ambulances with strangers who needed someone to stay steady while they decided whether or not to keep fighting. That was what this was. Not heroism, not anything worth a headline, just a person refusing to leave another person alone in the worst moment of their life. He only knew that at some point during those long minutes, he felt the faint, stubborn push of her heart, deciding to keep going. The paramedics found him kneeling in the open door of his car, hands still pressing against her sternum. They took over without ceremony, the way paramedics do, and he stepped back and stood on the sidewalk and watched them work. One of them looked up at him. "You do this before?" "Firefighter," Ryan said. "Former." The paramedic nodded once, the kind of nod that meant that explains it, and went back to what he was doing. They loaded her into the ambulance. A police officer appeared and took his information. Someone asked if he needed medical attention. He said no. Someone else told him the woman had been stabilized and was being taken to Northwestern Memorial. A detective would be in touch to collect a formal statement. Ryan stood on the sidewalk after they all left. His hazard lights were still blinking. He reached in and turned them off. He sat back in the driver's seat, put his hands on the wheel, and looked at the empty street for a while. Then he drove home in the dark. When he got home, Zoe was asleep. He stood in her doorway the way he always did, just for a moment, just to confirm the fact of her, the steady rise and fall of her breathing. And then he went to the kitchen. There was a drawing on the table, 3 people standing in front of a house full of flowers, same as always. He looked at it for a long time. He thought about the woman in the back of his car and the way she had held his forearm without letting go, and the sound her heart made when it decided to come back. He thought about the paramedic's single nod, the one that meant everything without saying it. He thought about all the moments in his life that no one would ever see or know about or give him credit for, and how that had never once been the reason he showed up to any of them. He folded the drawing carefully, placed it in the shoebox under his bed, and went to sleep. He did not yet know that what he had done, chest compressions, rescue breaths, the ordinary desperate physics of keeping someone alive, was already being described online as something else entirely. He was just a man who had made a decision in the dark, the only decision that made sense, the only one he could live with. That had always been enough for him. It would not be enough for everyone else. Claire Bennett spent a couple of days at Northwestern Memorial before her doctors cleared her to go home. She was not in general the kind of woman who ended up in situations she had not anticipated or planned for. She ran a company with over 400 employees and had not missed a board meeting in years. Her assistant Megan had already managed the calls from the board, adjusted her calendar, and drafted a brief internal memo explaining the CEO's absence as a minor medical event. Nothing of concern. Everything had been handled while Claire was unconscious, which was either a sign of a well-run organization or a quiet commentary on how things move on without any single person, and she chose not to think too hard about which one. What she could not stop thinking about was the man who had kept her alive. She did not get his name the night it happened. By the time she was coherent enough to ask questions, the paramedics were gone and the police officer had moved on. It took Megan a few phone calls to track down the information through the rideshare company's dispatch records. Ryan Thompson, late 30s, a couple of years with the company, clean record, former firefighter. Claire read the name and sat with it for a while. She was not good at gratitude in the way other people seem to be, the easy, fluid kind that moves through a person and comes out as warmth. Gratitude for her felt more like a debt, and she had spent most of her adult life structured around not being in debt to anyone, but this was different. This man had pulled over his car, called for help, and when help was not coming fast enough, had done the thing himself with his hands in the dark for a stranger whose name he did not know. She could not frame that as a transaction. She could not file it neatly anywhere. She reached out through the company. She was told he was available. She asked Megan to arrange something, nothing formal. She specified nothing in an office. They agreed on the Chicago Botanic Garden on a Saturday afternoon. Ryan almost did not bring Zoe. He had arranged for his neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, to watch her for the afternoon, and Zoe had accepted this without complaint right up until the moment she asked where he was going. And he said he was meeting someone, and she looked at him with those level, unhurried eyes she had inherited from Jessica, and said, "Is it the lady you saved?" He had mentioned the incident the day after briefly. "Something happened and I helped. It's fine." Zoe had nodded and asked for cereal, and he had thought that was the end of it. He had forgotten that Zoe filed everything. "Mrs. Jenkins saw it online," Zoe added. "She showed me the video." He had not realized the video was still circulating. He brought Zoe. Claire was already there when they arrived, standing near the entrance to the rose section, wearing something considerably less formal than the black dress from the night he had met her. She looked different in daylight. Or maybe she just looked like what she actually was without the context of the gala around her. She watched them approach with an expression that was hard to read, something between composure and the effort it takes to hold composure when you are not sure what you are about to feel. Ryan introduced Zoe. Zoe looked up at Claire with no particular shyness and said directly, "Are you the one my dad saved? He said it was not a big deal, but Mrs. Jenkins said people were watching it online." Claire glanced at Ryan. Ryan looked at the roses. "It was a very big deal," Claire said. "Your dad was incredibly brave." "He was a firefighter," Zoe said, as though this explained everything about everything. Then she looked around at the garden and said, "Can I draw this?" She had brought her sketch pad. She always brought her sketch pad. They walked through the garden for a while. Claire had expected the afternoon to feel obligatory, a gracious gesture, a completed courtesy. Instead, she found herself explaining to a 7-year-old how a water lily stem grows from the bottom of a pond all the way up through the water to bloom at the surface, because Zoe had asked and she happened to know because she had funded the aquatic exhibit renovation years prior. Zoe listened with complete seriousness, then asked whether the flower ever got scared of the dark at the bottom. Claire said she did not know. She thought probably not. Zoe accepted this and went back to her sketch pad. Ryan was quiet for most of the walk, not uncomfortable, just the particular quietness of someone watching carefully and not needing to fill space with words. At one point, Claire said she was sorry that she had not had the presence of mind to thank him properly at the time, and he said there was nothing to be sorry for. She had been unconscious. She said that was not quite the point, and he almost smiled. Before they left, Zoe tore a page from her sketch pad and held it out to Claire with both hands. It was the garden, 3 figures standing in front of it, drawn in the loose, confident lines of a child who draws for the pleasure of it and not for the result. Claire took it carefully. She meant to fold it into her bag. Instead, she held it at her side as they walked back toward the exit, and she was still holding it when they said goodbye at the gate. She carried it home with her. She did not know that someone had been watching from across the street for most of the afternoon. The photo went up the next day. It came from one of those anonymous Chicago gossip aggregators with tens of thousands of followers and no editorial standards. The image was clear. Claire Bennett in a garden with a black man and a small child laughing at something off camera. The caption read, "CEO, billionaire spotted with driver and his child. What is she hiding?" By afternoon, it had been picked up by local outlets. By evening, national entertainment blogs. By the following day, the comment sections had produced every possible version of a story. A secret child, a hidden relationship, a years-long affair, a cover-up in progress. Every version contradicted the others. All of them spread equally fast. The rideshare company called Ryan a couple of days later. They were suspending his account pending an internal review, they said. They used phrases like reputational risk and ongoing media situation. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When they were done, he said he understood and hung up. He sat at the kitchen table for a while. Then he made Zoe's lunch for the next day and went to bed. Claire came to the neighborhood once a week after the story broke to apologize in person. She came in a car without company markings, no assistant, no security. She had written down what she wanted to say on the drive over because she didn't trust herself to say it clearly without preparation. She got a couple of blocks from his building before a photographer got the shot. It ran with a new headline. Claire Bennett makes secret visit to driver's neighborhood. Sources say relationship more than professional. This one was worse. It had language like ongoing contact and multiple witnesses and questions the company has refused to address. Someone on a local morning radio show spent time speculating about the child. Claire's communications director called her several times in an hour. The rideshare company called Ryan again. This time the call was shorter. He set his phone face down on the counter and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the street. He had built a quiet life carefully and slowly around the specific needs of one small person. It was not much by the standards people use to measure lives like his, but it was steady. Zoe knew what to expect each day. She knew her father would be home. Routine for a child who had already lost one parent was not a small thing. It was architecture. Now the architecture was cracking. He noticed it first at school pickup. Nobody said anything to him directly. Nobody was unkind to Zoe. But there were looks. There were conversations that stopped when he approached the gate. And one afternoon, he arrived early and heard 2 parents talking near the entrance, their voices low, but not low enough. And he caught the words, "that driver," and all over the news. "And don't you wonder about the little girl?" And he stood very still until they moved away. Zoe had heard it too. He knew because she was standing a couple of feet behind him with her sketch pad pressed against her chest like a shield, looking at the ground with the expression of someone who has decided very firmly not to react to something. It was a look he recognized. It was a look he had seen in the mirror in the weeks after Jessica died when he was learning how to be in rooms full of people who did not know what to say to him. The fact that his 7-year-old daughter already knew how to make that face was the thing that stayed with him on the walk home more than anything else, more than the job, more than the headlines. She should not have known how to make that face yet. She did not say anything on the walk home. That night after dinner, she went to her room to draw. He did the dishes and went to check on her before bed. The drawing on her desk showed 2 people in front of a house, just 2, same loose lines, same crayon colors. But the 3rd figure was gone, not crossed out, not erased, just absent, as though it had never been there. Ryan looked at it for a long time. He understood in the way that parents understand things. Their children never say out loud exactly what the missing figure meant. Not anger, not a statement, just a child quietly adjusting her picture of the world to match the one she had been given. He said goodnight, turned off her light, and sat on the edge of his own bed in the dark. He called Claire the next morning. She picked up on the second ring. He did not lead with anything. No pleasantries, no setup. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "What I did that night, I would do it again for anyone without question. But every time your name ends up near mine, my daughter pays for it. She is 7 years old. She should not have to pay for any of this." Claire was quiet on the other end. Not the quiet of someone searching for a counter-argument, something heavier. "I know," she said. "Just those 2 words stripped of everything. Then please," Ryan said, "leave us alone." He hung up. He picked up Zoe's jacket from the chair where she always left it and hung it on its hook by the door. Claire sat in her car in the parking garage beneath her office building for a long time without moving. She had told her communications team the truth from the beginning. They had advised restraint, wait for the news cycle to move on. Let the story die. She had listened because they understood how these things worked, but the story had not died. It had grown, and it had grown in the specific direction of a man who had done nothing wrong and a child who had done nothing at all. She looked at the passenger seat. Zoe's drawing. The garden. 3 figures. The flowers folded in half in the front pocket of her bag. She had carried it with her every day since the garden. She had not told anyone that. She got out of the car and went inside. She did not yet know what she was going to do, but she was beginning to understand that doing nothing was no longer a choice she could make. She started with the photographs, not the ones the gossip accounts had posted. Those were symptoms, not the source. She went further back looking for the origin point, the first image that had seeded everything else. Her head of security, a methodical man named Henry, who had been with the company for years, pulled the metadata on the earliest photo and traced the upload path through intermediary accounts before hitting a dead end that was, in Henry's words, a little too clean to be accidental. Someone had deliberately scrubbed the trail, someone who knew exactly how. Claire sat across from Henry in the small conference room adjacent to her office and asked him to keep going. She gave him access to the company's internal communications logs for the past couple of months. She told him to look for anything related to her medical incident, anything related to the driver, anything that moved from inside the building outward. It took Henry a few days. When he came back, he set a single printed document on the table in front of her and did not say anything for a moment. The pattern was clear once you knew where to look. A series of forwarded emails, a shared contact in the media, a timing sequence that mapped perfectly against each new wave of press coverage. Every escalation, the initial photo, the visit to the neighborhood, the radio segment, had been fed from the same internal source through the same channel to the same anonymous aggregator account. The source was Robert Bennett, her mother's brother, the man who had sat on the Bennett Group board of directors since before Claire had graduated college. The man who had voted against her appointment as CEO years ago, then voted for her anyway when the numbers made it unavoidable, then spent the following years in a state of patient, well-dressed resentment that Claire had always registered and never directly confronted because confronting it would have required acknowledging it. And acknowledging it would have required a kind of family honesty she had never had the tools for. She sat with the document for a long time. Robert had not set out to destroy Ryan Thompson. Ryan was incidental, a detail that happened to be useful. The goal had always been to manufacture a crisis credible enough to call Claire's judgment into question before the next board vote on the proposed merger she had been quietly building toward for months. A CEO with an unexplained personal scandal, a murky situation involving a service employee, questions she refused to answer publicly. That was enough to make nervous board members nervous. That was enough to create an opening. Ryan and Zoe had not been targets. They had been tools. Claire folded the document, put it in her jacket pocket, and told Henry to retain everything. Then she went to her office and stood at the window and looked at the city she had spent her career building things inside of. She thought about Zoe's drawing, the 3 figures, the flowers. She thought about Zoe standing at the school gate with her sketch pad pressed to her chest, pretending not to hear. She picked up her phone and called her communications director. "Clear my schedule for tomorrow morning," she said. "I'm doing a live statement at the building." Her communications director asked if she wanted to discuss talking points first. "No," Claire said. "I know what I'm going to say." She didn't call Ryan to tell him, partly because she was not sure he would want to know in advance, partly because she owed him more than a phone call, and she had not yet figured out how to deliver what she actually owed him. So she did what she could do. She stood at a podium in the lobby of the Bennett Group building with cameras pointed at her, and she told the truth. She had not slept well the night before. She had sat at her kitchen table until late, going over everything she intended to say, not writing it down, just running it through her mind the way she had learned to do before a difficult board presentation, until the words stopped feeling like words and started feeling like facts. She simply needed to deliver in the right order. Her communications director had called. Her personal attorney had sent an email recommending she consult before speaking publicly. She had read both messages and set her phone face down and gone back to the kitchen table. She was not doing this for the board. She was not doing it for the company. She was doing it because a 7-year-old girl had stood at a school gate with a sketch pad pressed to her chest. And because that image had been living in Claire's mind for weeks and would not leave, and she was tired of it living there while she did nothing. All of it in order without notes. She told them about the gala, the coffee, the feeling in the car that something was wrong. She told them what Ryan had done, not in abstract terms, not with cleaned-up language, but specifically. He had pulled over, called for help, and when help was several minutes away, he had performed CPR on a stranger in the back of his own car in the dark alley until her heart decided to keep beating. She said the word CPR clearly and without embarrassment because that was what had happened, and she was tired of it being treated as a source of confusion by people who preferred a more interesting story. She told them about the garden. She said she had wanted to say thank you because what else do you say to someone who has kept you alive? She said a 7-year-old girl had handed her a drawing of 3 people standing in a garden and had done more for her in that moment than most adults had managed in years. She said Ryan Thompson had lost his job because she had not spoken up fast enough, and that was something she intended to correct. Then she talked about Robert. She was careful with this part, precise, factual, no editorializing. She presented what Henry had documented, the source, the timeline, the media contacts, the pattern of escalation. She said the board had been notified that morning and that an independent review was already underway. Then she said one more thing. She was establishing a fund, a permanent independently administered fund for single parents working service jobs in the city of Chicago. Rideshare drivers, home health aides, night shift hospital workers, the people who kept the city moving while everyone else was asleep. The fund would provide emergency income support, childcare assistance, and job training access. It would be called the Zoe Fund, named after a 7-year-old who had drawn 3 people in a garden and somehow already understood something that the adults in this room, herself included, were still working out. A reporter near the front raised her hand and asked why Zoe specifically. Claire looked at the question for a moment. "There is a child," she said, "who has never met most of you and who is probably drawing something right now that is more honest than anything I could say up here." She drew 3 people standing in front of a house full of flowers more than once. I think she knew something before the rest of us did. I thought the fund should carry her name. She did not take further questions. She walked back through the lobby and into the elevator and rode up to her floor. Mrs. Jenkins texted Ryan. "Claire Bennett is doing a live statement right now about you, Channel 7. He found the stream on his phone and propped it against the fruit bowl on the kitchen table. Zoe was sitting across from him, home for a teacher workday, sketchpad open beside her cereal bowl. She glanced up when he set the phone between them, and then she looked at the screen and stayed looking. Claire was in the middle of describing the night in the car, her voice steady, her hands flat on the podium. Zoe watched without saying anything. Then Claire said, "The Zoe Fund," and Zoe looked up sharply from the screen to her father and then back to the screen. "She named it after me," she said. "Sounds like it," Ryan said. Zoe considered this with the gravity it deserved. Then she picked up her green crayon and went back to her drawing without another word, which was for Zoe the highest possible form of approval. On the screen, the reporter asked Claire why she had chosen the name Zoe. Ryan watched Claire's face shift for just a moment, something small and real moving underneath the composure before she answered. When she finished, Zoe, without looking up from her sketchpad, said, "Is she going to cry?" Ryan watched the screen. Almost. He said, The board removed Robert Bennett from his position within days. The independent review produced documentation sufficient to terminate his seat and refer the matter to the company's legal team. He did not make a public statement. He did not reach out to Claire. The lawyers handled everything else, and Claire let them because there was nothing she wanted to say to him that would be improved by saying it. Some doors, she had learned, are better closed by other people than kicked open by yourself. The public reaction moved fast, the way it always does when people realize they had the story wrong. The same accounts that had run the original photographs ran corrections, brief, buried, half-hearted in the way corrections always are. The morning radio show that had spent time speculating about Zoe dedicated a few minutes to a retraction that mostly focused on how complicated the media landscape had become. Claire's communications director sent her a summary of the coverage shift with a note that said, "Momentum has fully reversed." She read it and put it in a drawer. What mattered was not the reversal. What mattered was the part that could not be reversed. Ryan's months of lost income, Zoe's weeks of navigating other people's whispers, the quiet damage done to a life that had not asked to be part of any of this. A news cycle turning in your favor does not undo those things. Claire knew that. She was not interested in a clean ending. She was interested in doing what she could with what remained. The rideshare company reinstated Ryan's account and issued a written apology. He appreciated the letter. He did not go back to driving nights. A few weeks after the press conference, Claire called and asked if he would be willing to meet with her HR director to discuss a different kind of role. The Bennett Group had 5 office buildings across Greater Chicago and an employee wellness initiative that had been underfunded and understaffed for years. One of the gaps, according to the most recent internal audit, was emergency preparedness training. The buildings had defibrillators in their lobbies that fewer than 12% of employees knew how to operate. The CPR certification rate across all 5 locations was in the single digits. Ryan listened to the whole proposal before he said anything. "Daytime hours?" he asked. "Every day." Claire said 8 to 4, full benefits. He said he would think about it. He talked to Zoe that evening. She asked, "So you would be teaching people how to save lives?" He said that was basically it. She said that seems better than driving them around at night. He agreed that it did. He took the job. Claire became part of their life the way weather does, gradually and then all at once, and then so familiar that you stop noticing it as a separate thing. It started with practical things. She would stop by the Bridgeport office location where Ryan ran his certification sessions and ask him something work-related and then stay for coffee after. She learned that Zoe had a rotating favorite color that changed every few weeks without explanation. She learned that Ryan made breakfast for dinner on Thursdays because Zoe had decided years ago that breakfast food was better than dinner food, and he had long since stopped arguing the point. She learned that he kept the shoebox under his bed full now, pressed down with rubber bands to hold the lid on, and that he hadn't told Zoe it existed because he was not sure she would know what to do with the fact of it. Zoe, for her part, received Claire's increasing presence in the apartment with a complete lack of drama. As though she had been expecting it and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up, she started teaching Claire to draw. Claire was, by any objective measure, a terrible student. Her proportions were wrong, her lines were uncertain, and she had a persistent tendency to grip the crayon too hard, which Zoe told her very seriously was the whole problem. "You have to hold it like it's not going anywhere," Zoe said, "because it's not going anywhere." Claire looked at the crayon in her hand. "That's not how I usually hold things." "I know," Zoe said. "That's why you're bad at it." Ryan, who was making coffee in the kitchen and could hear all of this perfectly well, did not say anything. The drawing appeared on the living room wall on a Saturday morning in early spring. Ryan noticed it when he came out to make coffee, a new one, in the simple clip frame Zoe had asked him to buy at the craft store the previous week. 3 figures standing in front of a house surrounded by flowers. Lily flowers specifically, because Zoe had recently decided that lily flowers were the most honest kind because they did not try to look like anything other than what they were. All 3 figures were fully colored in this time, no empty spaces left. He stood there looking at it for a while. Claire arrived around 10 with 2 coffees from the place on the corner that Zoe had approved because Zoe had opinions about coffee shops based entirely on their pastry selection, despite not drinking coffee. Zoe immediately pulled her to the table to continue the drawing lesson that had been ongoing for weeks and was, according to Zoe, showing only modest progress. Ryan put the coffees down and stood back and watched the 2 of them bent over the sketch pad. Zoe explaining that you have to look at the thing you are drawing and not at the paper. Claire frowning in concentration and holding the crayon slightly less like she was trying to prevent it from escaping. Outside, it was the kind of April morning that Chicago occasionally produces as an apology for winter, clear and warm, light coming through the kitchen window at an angle that made everything look a little more like itself. Later, after the drawing lesson, after lunch, after Zoe had gone to her room to add more lily flowers to a work in progress, Ryan and Claire stood in the kitchen, coffee cups empty on the counter. The apartment quiet in the way it gets when a child is deeply occupied elsewhere. The drawing on the wall caught the afternoon light at a certain angle. 3 figures, fully colored, standing in front of a house that looked remarkably like the one they were standing in right now. Ryan had noticed it the moment he came out that morning and had not said anything about it, because some things do not need to be said to be understood. There was no camera, no headline waiting on the other side of anything. Nobody outside the window with a long lens looking for a story. He kissed her the way he did most things, quietly, without announcement, as if it were simply the next thing that made sense. In her room, Zoe added one more flower to the corner of her drawing, looked at it once, and set the crayon down. She had known this was coming. She had, in fact, known for quite some time. She just had not said anything because some things work better when you let people figure them out on their own. That night in the back of Ryan Thompson's car taught me something I'll never forget, something that still catches in my throat when I think about it. In the darkest, most terrifying moment of her life, when Claire Bennett's heart literally stopped beating, a quiet, single dad didn't see a powerful CEO, a billionaire, or a stranger who could ruin him. He just saw another human being who needed him, and he chose to stay. He chose to fight for her life with nothing but his hands, his training, and his steady heart, while the rest of the world drove right past with their phones out. The real lesson here isn't about heroism or viral videos. It's simpler and deeper than that. It's about showing up for someone when no one is watching, when there's nothing to gain, and when doing the right thing might actually cost you everything. Ryan lost his job, his privacy, and watched his little girl learn how to carry shame that wasn't hers. Yet he never once regretted the choice he made in the dark. Because some things matter more than comfort, more than safety, more than what people will say about you tomorrow. We spend so much time protecting our image, our reputation, our little worlds. But what if the most important thing we'll ever do is the moment we decide not to look away? What if real courage is measured in quiet seconds on cold pavement, not in applause? I want to know, what would you have done if you were Ryan that night? Would you have pulled over? Would you have started CPR on a stranger whose life could destroy yours? Or would fear have won? Drop your honest answer in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story moved you even a little, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Let's keep telling stories that remind us what it really means to be human. I'll see you in the next one.